World of Warfare presents the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Launched on June 22nd of 1944, the Soviet Union's offensive on the Eastern Front, codenamed Operation Bagration, so named after the Georgian prince and Russian general Peter Bagration, a hero of the Napoleonic Wars, proved to be one of the most decisive and devastating defeats for the Nazis during the entirety of World War II. In less than 2 months, the Soviet Red Army would shatter Germany's Army Group Center, the Nazis' largest and most prestigious military division on the Eastern Front, obliterating much of Germany's defensive positions in Belorussia, at the same time inflicting catastrophic casualties that accelerated a broader unraveling of the Third Reich in the single greatest defeat in German military history, even greater than Stalingrad. It also represented the culmination of Russia's strategic reform, operational maturity, and material superiority that spelled the end for Adolf Hitler's aspirations and overreach on the Eastern Front. With more than 100,000 German troops encircled from the east and southeast at Minsk, a desperate escape attempt across the Berezina River led to what is now known as the Berezina Cauldron, when Soviet aircraft and artillery destroyed bridges and makeshift German crossing points, leading to the surrender and deaths of tens of thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers by the end of July the 5th. After an appallingly short period of time since the start of hostilities, Army Group Center had ceased to exist as a cohesive fighting force. With Minsk back in Soviet hands, the Red Army continued their westward objective, taking Vilnius on July 13th after heavy fighting, Grodno and Bialystok 2 days later, and Lublin by July 24th. In the south, Soviet forces crossed the Bug River and advanced into eastern Poland, while in the north, the Red Army entered the heartland of Germany itself. By late July, Soviet spearheads had approached the Vistula River as they faced off with German defenses around Warsaw, leading to the Warsaw Uprising of August 1st of 1944, when the Polish Home Army attempted to liberate the city before Soviet forces could cross the river. Yet it was at the river that Operation Bagration ended for logistical reasons beyond German resistance, due primarily to troop exhaustion, supply shortages, and overstretched lines, leading to the uprising's tragic loss to German forces. When the Soviets and their Western allies failed to come to their aid, as well as the mass killing of Warsaw residents and the almost complete destruction of the city that lasted a deafening 63 days. Nor was the Warsaw Uprising the first act of defiance by the citizens of Poland, for when Hitler's Wehrmacht forces invaded its neighbor on September 1st of 1939, the Polish people resisted Germany's aggression with bravery and sacrifice as they waited for promised help from the French and British. Instead, on September 17th, Poland was attacked from the east by the Soviet Red Army, as Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin had agreed to under the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact prior to the outbreak of war. Together with the Nazis, the two totalitarian powers brought upon Poland a steady wave of destruction, cruelty, and barbarism on a scale never before experienced, leading to Adolf Hitler's personal attendance for a victory parade through the war-torn streets of Warsaw on October 5th of 1939. At the start of the occupation of Warsaw, German officers and soldiers felt relatively at ease on the streets of the city, only to become increasingly uneasy as resistance fighters attacked their forces any chance they could get. In response, the German Gestapo came down hard on Warsaw citizens, renaming Aleja Schuha Avenue the Straße der Polizei, where Polish citizens were beaten, tortured, and executed, such as Warsaw student Elżbieta Zawarska, who was executed for tearing down a Nazi propaganda poster that read, "England, it's your doing." Before her execution on November 3rd, the heroic girl made her defiant thoughts known by yelling in German, "Poland has not perished yet." Nor was the German brutality limited to average Warsaw citizens when they set about the systematic annihilation of every citizen of Jewish ancestry, where Jews were forced into a badly run-down ghetto, only to die in droves under conditions of rape, torture, and execution. In tandem, the Germans' 5-year occupation of Warsaw witnessed the deaths of 6 million Polish citizens, including 3 million Polish Jews, all happening in full view of the outside world, who remained pathetically silent in the face of the Nazis' brutal reign of terror. German mistreatment of Warsaw's Jewish community came to a head beginning on April 19th of 1943, when Jews launched a heroic 29-day armed revolt against the Nazis, which saw 56,065 Jews killed, captured, or sent to concentration camps. After the Soviet Union joined Allied forces in June of 1941, during the last days of July 1944, Soviet divisions descended on Warsaw in great numbers, leading Hitler and his German High Command to order the German Ninth Army to turn Warsaw into a fortified city, with additional orders to stand and fight to the last man. Instead, more than 100,000 Warsaw residents built fortifications of their own, as mostly young people worked hand in hand to resist the Germans' occupation of their city. Fearing that if Poland were liberated by the Red Army, Stalin and his Western allies would ignore the exiled London-based Polish government after the war, instead establishing a satellite puppet government with allegiances to Stalin and the Kremlin. After 5 years of brutal persecution under Nazi occupation, the uprising broke out at 5 p.m. on August 1st, 1944, which drove Hitler into an instant rage when he was given the news, issuing an unequivocal order to destroy Warsaw in a communique that read, "We must kill all citizens, taking no prisoners. Warsaw must be obliterated so that in this manner a terrifying example will be set for all of Europe." Over 2,000 Polish resistance Home Army fighters were killed in the opening battle, including a nurse named Krystyna Krachalska, who had authored the patriotic resistance song, "Hey Boys, Fix the Bayonets." On the 4th day of the uprising, a bullet to the temple fatally wounded the famous poet and resistance fighter Krzysztof Kamil Baczynski, one of the most famous young stars of the World War I generation of Columbuses. Both the Polish underground fighters and the Germans were equally matched in terms of manpower, between 45,000 to 55,000 on each side, yet resistance fighters lacked any kind of heavy weapons or a sufficient supply of ammunition. As the casualties mounted, thousands of Warsaw women, from grandmothers to young girls, took part in the uprising as students, teachers, workers, and housewives nursed the wounded, cooked food for resistance fighters, and supported their Polish sons and fathers who fought in the uprising. Even prepubescent boys took part in the uprising as they snuck through foul sewers before surfacing with bottles of gasoline that destroyed German tanks and other vehicles. They also helped with the operation of heavy machine guns, while young girls from the Scouts crossed German lines to deliver command messages to resistance fighters, soon becoming a standout symbol of Warsaw's fight against Nazi tyranny. The civilian population was completely behind us, one resistance fighter recalled after the war. They helped us in every possible way. They would share their food. If we were wounded, they would hide us and take care of us. One of the elite battalions of the Polish Home Army, the Zosko Battalion, captured a couple of German tanks, which they used to storm a nearby concentration camp, liberating some 350 Jewish prisoners before recruiting them into their own ranks. For their part, the Germans began their offensive on Warsaw on August 5th, slaughtering thousands of civilians in an orgy of plunder, mass rape of women, and execution-style murders. taking the lives of more than 20,000 Poles in the first 2 days of their offensive. The Germans also used women and children as human shields, placing them in front of moving tank columns so that resistance fighters would not fire on the tanks and infantry units that followed behind every group of human shields. To counter the Germans' tactics, many resistance fighters donned Nazi uniforms replete with typical German badges, helping resistance fighters storm an 8-story telephone building that served as a German fortress, leading German soldiers trapped within to surrender after 3 weeks of heavy fighting. Kurt Heller, a German soldier trapped in the siege, chronicled his misery in his personal diary, writing, "August 5, Rudolph killed, along with a few friends. August 6, death awaits outside, and one wants to live. 3 friends shot themselves. August 7, 14 people killed, buried in the courtyard, bad air from the stench of death. August 13, when will liberation ensue? August 16, terrible hunger, fear at night. August 17, the Poles are trying to smoke us out with fire and bottles of gas. A few people again lost their nerve and committed suicide. August 19, liberation is hopeless." As more German units and stormtroopers from the SS Dirlewanger Brigade, an anti-partisan outfit under the command of Heinrich Himmler, streamed into Warsaw, the civilian death toll increased dramatically, leading survivors to bury the dead in rubble on sidewalks and fields. Old Town and the city center saw the worst killings in Warsaw on August 4th and 5th in the boroughs of Wola and Ochota, where Special SS, police, and Wehrmacht groups went house to house, shooting the inhabitants regardless of age or gender before burning their bodies. Estimates of civilians killed in Wola and Ochota range from 20,000 to 50,000, soaring to more than 100,000 by August 8th. Every manner of projectile was used to destroy the city, including rockets that destroyed homes, while burning incendiary bombs charred inhabitants alive. 600mm cannon fire hurled 2,000-pound exploding shells into buildings. A correspondent for the German weekly magazine Das Reich wrote of the battles in the Old Town area. Mine throwers and heavy artillery decimated the walls. Bombs from the air destroyed yards, and tanks dispersed the city's defenders with their murderous fire. 14-year-old Wanda Shabilska wrote in her diary, "On the day I was almost killed by the bomb, the coat I had on began to burn. Thankfully, I had enough presence of mind to throw the coat off, and when I did, I fainted. It was a miracle that I survived." She was killed only 1 week later. Every day of the uprising, an average of between 2,000 to 3,000 innocent civilians were killed, who had nothing to do with the fighting. Generally, when civilians were caught in the cellars of falling buildings or burned to death in buildings set alight by Nazi firepower. On September 2nd, 5,000 resistance fighters and 6,000 civilians were evacuated from the city center area using underground canals to avoid detection, until the Nazis tossed gas grenades into the canal that soon became the site of Dantesque scenes of death, panic, and loss of sanity. Others emerged from the tunnel safely, only to walk straight into German traps that led to their execution by firing squad. After Maria Sedis was critically injured during the evacuation attempt, she was asked by a German soldier, "Are you abandoned?" To which she replied with dignity, "I am a soldier of the Home Army." Then she was shot. On August 26th, the Soviet Army under the command of Konstantin Rokossovsky renewed their offensive against the 4th SS Panzer Corps east of Warsaw, forcing the Germans to retreat into the Warsaw suburb of Praga, just as the Soviets arrived on the east bank of the Vistula River. By September 13th, the Germans had destroyed all remaining bridges over the Vistula, signaling that they were abandoning all their positions east of the river. On the night of September 14th, 3 patrols, from General Zygmunt Berling's First Polish Army made contact with Home Army forces before attempting to cross the Vistula River under artillery cover and air support provided by the Soviets. Instead, effective machine gun fire by the Germans inflicted heavy losses to the First Polish Army, which proved to be the only outside assistance attempt by Allied forces during the 9-week Warsaw Uprising. Out of an approximate 900 Polish Army troops who attempted to penetrate Warsaw, only a handful made it back to the eastern side of the river. As the uprising dragged on, food shortages became increasingly dire for the more than 1 million residents of Warsaw, while water shortages added to the misery when water conduits were either destroyed by bombs or filled up with corpses. To help ease the shortages, the RAF parachuted supplies into the beleaguered city, while the Polish Air Force also made supply drops from distant airfields in Italy. Even so, the effect of these airdrops was mostly psychological, since they delivered too few supplies for the needs of hungry residents and resistance fighters, while many airdrops landed outside Polish-controlled territory. From September 13th to the 30th, the Soviets also commenced their own resupply missions, dropping arms, medicine, and food supplies. By the first week of September, both German and Polish commanders realized that the Soviet army was unlikely to act in terms of breaking the stalemate, which led to negotiations to end the standoff on September 8th. As a result, from the 8th to the 10th, some 20,000 civilians were evacuated by a truce agreed to by both sides, which also recognized the right of Home Army soldiers to be treated as military combatants under the Geneva Convention. The Poles suspended the talks on the 11th after they received news that the Soviets were advancing yet again through Praga, only to resume again after the Germans had retaken Molotov, leading to a final capitulation agreement on October 2nd. The next day, the Germans began to disarm Home Army soldiers, later sending 15,000 to POW camps in various parts of Germany, while other resistance fighters decided to blend in with the civilian population, hoping to continue the fight at a later date. Shortly after the uprising ended, Heinrich Himmler said, "This has been the hardest battle we have fought since the war's beginning. It is comparable only to the fight for every home in Stalingrad." For the Polish Home Army, the uprising had been a costly one, witnessing 15,200 killed in action or missing and 5,000 wounded in action, while the Polish First Army suffered 5,660 casualties. The Germans suffered an equal number of those killed or missing, while the civilian population of Warsaw witnessed 150,000 to 200,000 deaths before an additional 700,000 were expelled from the city. After the war, communist authorities in Poland did everything in their power to suppress the memory of the uprising, forbidding any monuments to be built until 1989. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, every year on August the 1st at exactly 5 p.m., the time when the uprising first began, air raid and police sirens across the country sound for 1 minute. Traffic comes to a halt. Pedestrians stand in place on streets as crowds gather in parks to pay tribute to the fallen soldiers and civilians who paid with their lives for the freedoms Poles enjoy today.